Yeah, there was now I have several things, but one is this the unknown, which I think where art plays a very big role, and to dare to go into the unknown. So I think also one role that we can have also is to show bravery, and that is what we often refer to, and Malin said also in her text, is that for us, we often say that art is to make what you long for. So, and that is a bit the same also here, that maybe we can't talk with the biosphere, but showing that you long for it is very touching. It's the same with you guys longing to do a better job for the climate change with such a difficult task with international dance, but it's also that longing which is so beautiful. And this imagining, what you said, Benny, I think is very important in this project as well. And I refer to often to a little bit boring thing, but that was a football coach that was telling us teachers that he lets his players imagine that they win the whole match before they do it. And then you see possibilities. And I think that is exactly what is needed now, that it's not, I think we are too much like running behind the facts, and now we have to save that, and now we have to get the plastic out of the sea and so, but I think what we should do is really imagine that we are winning and the earth is winning, that we are doing that beautiful world. So then we can really sincerely make steps and be ahead of the stream. So, but it seems two things that artists, we all are very good at: imagining, going to the unknown, doing what we long for. So that's for me.
Benny?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. No, I was also, and this is an open question, like a question that I don't fully understand, because I totally agree with Mathieu that like maybe it's even the responsibility for the artist to imagine another world. And maybe we do that, you know, maybe when I go out of my flat and I paint a picture of what's directly in front of me, the picture will never be exactly the same as what I see. So I've already created a discrepancy between the real world and what I've imagined. And this discrepancy is a possibility. So there's something to insert. There's like a utopian moment in them. And yeah, for me also, I think why I brought up this idea of political imagination, I really have question of like, why is capitalism so good at stifling our imagination, and what has happened with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of state communism to our imaginations? Like there's a total collapse. At least I'm saying we, but I'm speaking for me as a white man socialized in Germany. Like there is. Yeah, I guess like, why is it so, we can kind of like imagine it, but I almost feel like the solutions to our problems are there or very palpable, but there's no commitment to it. Like you say, we could politically decide to just ban plastic for wrapping vegetables. It would be very easy, but somehow like the mechanized, like, yeah, like, what are we missing there? Why is it so difficult to do these things?
Good question.
Just very quickly, as a response, that's not an answer, it's just one theory. Capitalism and Christianity, they have just colonized the image. And by colonizing the image, they could really dominate a lot. It's Hollywood, is the world of advertisements, commercials, clips, it's the selling business. Like Judaism and Islam, they have for a very long time strict rules had like no images, which creates a bigger space, a more open space and less controlling space that is not dominated by the image. That's one theory, but there are more.
Yeah, maybe I could say something about capitalism. There's a really interesting book out now by a Swedish, he's a literature historian, philosopher, professor at Yale, called Martin Hägglund. And the book is called This Life. And it starts off with the discussions around religious faith versus secular faith, and how a finite life is the only way we could live. We cannot live with the idea of immortality, for instance, because that makes us unresponsible about our environment and about ourselves and our family and our closest members. And then he goes into how to build a new type of society beyond capitalism. And he has a really interesting rereading of Marx, actually, which is how to revalue value itself. And he talks about the new currency should be free time. And this is really interesting reading in this specific time where we suddenly have all this free time to do whatever we want to do with. It's difficult to envision how this sort of utopia, it's not a utopia, it's just a different type of how to organize society, that we all should work together like this, and we have to formulate our own institutions and companies and take responsibility of creating the new capital, which is free time. And then we do whatever we want to do with that. So according to Martin, the big problem with climate change and irresponsibility is capitalism. And until we find a solution of surpassing capitalism, we won't be able to get out of the conundrum of how to become responsible towards the biosphere or to one another, etc., etc. That's a very, I mean, it's really an interesting book, and I could really suggest it. And it would be interesting also, the Niemanis text that Benji mentioned, it would be interesting to read. And it would be interesting if maybe everyone who has some text, maybe we could have some, you know, collection of thoughts and text and share it with one another.
That would be great. I'm going to move. Are you done, Matt?
I'm done.
Sorry, just to make sure. The horse wants to speak, and then I will go back to Benny. But first, the horse.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey. Now, this was a comment on this question of how can we end capitalism, or I was just referring back a bit to what I tried to say earlier, that Darwinism was, I mean, it was somehow misinterpreted and became a foundation for that sort of mindset where that Christianity already had brought into us about the survival of the fittest and the whole existence as a competition and a fight between different species or within the species to survive. And this, I just mean that overcoming that idea of the fight and finding the collaboration and which is actually much more going on in nature, in fact, is the mutual help and aid and taking care of each other in order to survive, than killing each other in order to survive. Even in human societies and cultures, this is much bigger. Only we have been led to believe that it's inherent in ourselves to fight and compete. And that is what capitalism is building on, that logic that is in fact an invention. We should not be too hard on ourselves also. I once read some numbers on how much money and resources that are spent on commercials compared to how much we spend on education. And the amount of resources and money we spend on commercial and advertising, like it far triple doubles the money we spend on education for ourselves. So it's a big force that wants us to stay in this narrative, but we can I think be a counter force to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Benny?
I feel like I opened up a can of worms where I could talk a lot, so I'll try and be brief. One thing I want to say, I would love some form or platform where we can share different resources and thoughts, because talking now about these things, like a lot of texts that I've read years ago come back up. I also have to think Darwin was just mentioned. There was Peter Kropotkin, an anarchist, a Russian aristocrat turned anarchist, who tried to write a book about cooperation and collaboration being the main principle in nature rather than competition and natural selection. It's probably not as scientifically sound as Darwin, but there's something about like also like a critique of Darwin and an expansion of that thought to allow for another element in this in the theory, that there's also more than just an against, there's also together. I also have to think of Murray Bookchin, who's an American anarchist who wrote already in the 70s about the relationship between humans and nature being irresolvable unless we solve problems of exploitation of humans and humans, the interconnectedness of domination. We learn how to dominate each other from how we dominate nature, and we learn how to dominate nature from how we dominate each other. So that would be very interesting. I also just had to think about this thing that Mats was bringing up with regards to capitalism. I mean, it's also capitalism, and I'm totally guilty of that. Capitalism is a word that we can bring up, and then like it's vague, you know, like we have to define it also. What is capitalism? How does it define our interhuman relationships? What does it reduce them to? How does it capitalize on our relationships? I think one thing also that I'm wondering about, and I'm not sure if that's really what Mats was bringing up with this book he mentioned, but there is something about, there's a certain, what's the word, complicity of the socialist movements in Europe in maintaining capitalism. And I think that's our worshipping of labor, this idea that the foundation of being a society is being in labor, and labor being then ultimately the production of values, which are abstract. They're not like we saw also yesterday in this this presentation. They're not about cultural capital. They're not about natural capital. They're just this human economy.
Like here, we are working now for Zoom. So we are producing value. We are workers for Zoom, for the company Zoom, for instance.
Yeah.
We're all contributing constantly. So capitalism is the creation of value through human labor, but that could be this. So we have to escape that. We have to make our own chat rooms.
Yeah.
Well, that was just...
Not so long ago, I saw a little documentary about a mayor who decided to delete all the advertisement on the streets, talking about advertisement, so we can see the street again. I remember being in Finland, in the capital of in Helsinki, long time ago, and then there were not all these colorful advertisements, and they came later, and it really changed the city a lot. So when I said before something about tindering your mind, you know what I mean? So to delete things in order to see better. As a suggestion.